Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another Propagandacast. Lehr with me, your host, Imperial Dane. Whoops. Scheiße. There we go. Slightly forgotten to sort of slow things down. I occasionally do that just out of random because I'm used to doing that while watching replay initially. But the topic of the day, as I'm sure some of you have already guessed here, are the Osttruppen. Yes, indeed, we're going to be focusing a bit on the Osttruppen here for the Propagandacast Lehr today. One of the more particular units of the German army, part of commanders, either the Osttruppen commander, which allows you to call them in specifically, or you also get the relief troops, which basically replaces some of your troops with Osttruppen as the game progresses and you suffer losses. But of course, what about the Osttruppen, you wonder? I mean, you get a 6-man squad, and again, they're rather sort of, different from other Osttruppen squads in several departments. I mean, they'll generally an infantry unit, and notice amongst other things here, they actually take a point rather slowly. I mean, that's one of their initial weaknesses. They are also pretty damn cheap, which is also one of their strengths. I mean, they're cheap, but amongst other things, they take points rather slowly. They can't fire on the move, which also means you're not really going to be using them as, assault troops in any department whatsoever. Any attempt at that, in fact, will probably end up in tears. So keep that in mind for starters when you're utilising your Osttruppen. Again, note here, nothing really happening. They're sort of looking like they want to shoot, but, they don't quite have the sufficient Germanic courage to pull that one off, I suppose. So that is something to keep in mind. They also suffer from another little thing, which is that is, per individual soldier, or model as some might call it, they actually have less health than most other units. In fact, they have about, I think, 43 health, which overall means they can't really take up as much damage as most other units. That is another little disadvantage. And then you might sort of notice here when they're in cover, they get this little crosshairs mark floating about them, and that's really one of the other sort of things about them. Outside of cover, they are really terrible. They basically can't hit anything. Once they get into cover, they can actually begin hitting and doing damage. But again, out of cover, they're not really that strong, and that's something very important to keep in mind with the Osttruppen. You really have to utilize them in cover or buildings to get the same bonus in structures. So in that department, when utilizing your Osttruppen, you really have to sort of, glide it together well, keep cover in mind, really strong cover, in fact. Buildings, all that, sort of slowly work your way forward. You can't just rush up to the enemy unless you fancy ending up with a lot of dead Eastern Europeans under German command. So that is a rather vital little thing to keep in mind there while playing around with your Osttruppen. Because otherwise, I mean, you'll end up with a lot of dead of them pretty quickly. Also, I mean, yes, you can get a lot of them actually pretty quickly, in fact. But again, that also means you're going to have a bit of trouble, grabbing a lot of territory in some departments. You can sort of take more at the same time, but overall it'll actually be slower. And of course, you spread them out that far, I mean, you're also going to find them that they will be, of course, much exposed and rather easily cleared off. I mean, on the other hand, if you say you have 2 Osttruppen squads, again, that costs 240 manpower, which is the equivalent of 1 conscript squad. I mean, you can actually have more health and firepower than 1 squad of conscripts for the same price. Though, of course, again, you have to stay in cover, and of course, if you pop some mods on forcing your way, I mean, already their 1 squad will be a lot less efficient. But that's another thing to keep in mind while utilizing the Osttruppen again. Cover is important. You have to be extremely mindful of cover. And of course, right here, denying the Osttruppen here, the cover right there, of course, does make a huge difference. Unlike most other cover users, I mean, they basically just have to stand close to it, and they'll apparently just get a boost of courage. You don't have to worry about it being directional in this case. Again, just as long as they're in cover, they're doing alright. Though, of course, you still want it, be prob, but I mean, if you have nothing else, I mean, just being in touch with it will do something. Note here, I mean, right here, of course, they'll have absolutely no chance. There we go, quick retreating right here. Good job there. Another thing, though, is they actually also have Panzerfausts. So, I mean, they do possess some threat there to vehicles as well, if you sort of keep that in mind. So, overall, I mean, you get, in some departments, actually pretty weak squad. But again, cheap, you get numerous of them, and that way you can sort of get an advantage. Also, the larger squad sizes does impart one interesting advantage to them. They're less vulnerable to high explosive weapons due to the fact they'll be more spread out generally, and thus you're less likely to lose them to a mortar round or a mine like that. So that's sort of a small hidden advantage to them. I mean, it's not a massive one, and certainly not one you should be strongly counting upon, but it's still a good thing to keep in mind. In that department, you'll probably be suffering a lot less while utilizing your Osttruppen. But again, cover, cover, and cover. Of course, here again, they're having a bit of trouble, so they're not getting both of them again. Touch cover, and oh hey, feels semi-good now, Kameraden.
our territory.
And generally, you want them supported with support weapons. MG42s in larger amounts, of course, are viable, since again you'll have a larger quantity of infantry, and some use them to sort of support them. Of course, some players might just basically go for large hordes of them, and then, you know, go for something else, but that is not necessarily that recommendable, at least not from my perspective. Of course, another little fun thing about the Osttruppen, you'll sort of see that once we pull them back here towards the base. Now, of course, is they're actually pretty cheap. They only cost 10 manpower to reinforce. And then we have another little thing here, which hopefully, if helping hands here, a great use of Osttruppen, will display and reinforce them. There we go. They reinforce incredibly fast. And then you might say, well, that's pretty great, but how does that help me beyond, you know, knowing they do that? But here's the thing. That also applies to support weapons that we capture. So, for example, I mean, you can have an MG42. It'll be having a little less help, but on the other hand, you can much quicker reinforce it in some departments. That actually sort of gives them some advantages. It certainly makes them much trickier to deal with, for example, by snipers who have have a slower rate of fire than they can kill the Osttruppen if they can be reinforced by, say, a half-tech or a command bunker at the front. So that, for example, is a little fun one there to keep in mind, if you will. Also, another thing about the Osttruppen is they actually veterans you up pretty damn quickly. They're one of the fastest units to veterans you up, and generally you can actually expect to get veterans for your Osttruppen reasonably fast if you handle them all right. Which overall makes them sort of semi-competent. But again, cover matters. Cover matters. Cover always matters when using the Osttruppen. That's something I would suggest, you know, keep in mind very strongly. Very strongly, in fact. But overall, I mean, that's really some of the main pointers of Osttruppen. They can, of course, lay down bunkers and trenches if you have the right commanders. And overall, in that department, I mean, they can also use, you know, support your efforts as well. Of course, they possess no upgrades, so you can't really further boost the firepower without picking something up from somebody else. Also very important to keep in mind. But if you do keep these things in mind while utilising the Osttruppen, I mean, generally, you can find yourself doing something with them. And generally, you'll want several squads to be operating within the same sort of small area, supporting each other. I mean, again, one-on-one fights, they pretty much stand no chance. At best, you can have them in a building and basically hold up your opponent for a bit. But beyond that, I mean, anything else is sheer suicide with them. They generally need to be, you know, used in larger numbers. Several squads working together to overcome one foe or foes. So keep that in mind. Generally, you will find yourself doing alright with the Osttruppen. So that's, well, rather, again, one of those shorter videos. But again, I mean, Osttruppen, some things can be said about it, but again, other things, you know, are a bit more dependent on other things. And again, I mean, I actually got a video on Osttruppen opening, so you can, for example, check that out. You know, have a sort of more gameplay looking towards that. But overall, these were basically more the basics of the Osttruppen, the basic concepts of the Osttruppen. Again, weak but large numbers. Slow to take points, but cheap, so you can actually take several points. I mean, there's some interesting contradictions actually working within them, I suppose. But again, you want to use them in large numbers. Generally, you don't get much if you don't get a bunch of them. But again, cover matters a lot. Without cover, they're practically useless. So, you know, remember when using them, try to always somehow stick in cover. And again, you just need to be slightly touching it with one member, and again, the entire squad gets the bonus. So always try to sort of look out. If there's anything that just sort of looks like a yellow circle, green circle, get them there if possible. And then again, you will find yourself doing alright. And again, you also need plenty of support weapons to sort of back them up. Some might also get panzer cannons, then to sort of really add some firepower afterwards. So there you go. I hope this has been an enlightening video on the topic of the Osttruppen. If so, I mean, you know, feel free to subscribe, tell your friends, share with everyone, you know, share with those who might be disbelievers in the might of the Osttruppen. And if not, you know, well, that's unfortunate, but you know, tell me what sort of Propagandacast Lehr videos you might see in the comments, and I'll sort of try to work my way towards it. Again, it's rather dependent on what sort of videos I have showing off what kind of things. Sort of. So, hopefully you've enjoyed this and learned something. This is Imperial Lane, wishing you a good day.